Chapter 18 Revelation at Yazuak. Although they had managed to partially refill the water skins during the storm, they drank the last of their water that morning. "Whew, I hope we're going in the right direction," said Eragon, crunching up the empty water bag. "Because we'll be in trouble if we don't reach Yazuak today." Brom did not seem disturbed. "I've traveled this way before. Yazuak will be in sight before dusk." Eragon laughed doubtfully. "Perhaps you see something I don't. How can you know that when everything looks exactly the same for leagues around?" "Because I am guided not by the land, but by the stars and sun. They will not lead us astray. Come, let us be off. It is foolish to conjure up woe where none exists. Yazuak will be there." His words proved true. Saphira spotted the village first, but it was not until later in the day that the rest of them saw it as a dark bump on the horizon. Yazuak was still very far away. It was only visible because of the plain's uniform flatness. As they rode closer, a dark winding line appeared on either side of the town and disappeared in the distance. "The Ninor River," said Brom, pointing at it. Eragon pulled Kadok to a stop. "Saphira will be seen if she stays with us much longer. Should she hide while we go into Yazuak?" Brom scratched his chin and looked at the town. "See that bend in the river? Have her wait there. It's far enough from Yazuak so no one should find her, but close enough that she won't be left behind. We'll go through the town, get what we need, and then meet her." "I don't like it," said Saphira, when Eragon had explained the plan. "This is irritating, having to hide all the time like a criminal." "You know what will happen if we were revealed?" She grumbled, but gave in, and flew away, low to the ground. They kept a swift pace in anticipation of the food and drink they would soon enjoy. As they approached the small houses, they could see smoke from a dozen chimneys, but there was no one in the streets. An abnormal silence enveloped the village. By unspoken consent, they stopped before the first house. Eragon abruptly said, "There aren't any dogs barking." "No." "Doesn't mean anything, though." "No." Eragon paused. "Someone should have seen us by now." "Yes." "Then why hasn't anyone come out?" Brom squinted at the sun. "Could be afraid." "Could be," said Eragon. He was quiet for a moment. "And if it's a trap, the Razak might be waiting for us." "We need provisions and water." "There's the Ninor." "Still need provisions." "True." Eragon looked around. "So we go in?" Brom flicked his reins. "Yes, but not like fools. This is the main entrance to Yazuak. If there's an ambush, it'll be along here. No one will expect us to arrive from a different direction." "Around to the side, then?" asked Eragon. Brom nodded and pulled out his sword, resting the bare blade across his saddle. Eragon strung his bow and nocked an arrow. They trotted quietly around the town and entered it cautiously. The streets were empty, except for a small fox that darted away as they came near. The houses were dark and foreboding, with shattered windows. Many of the doors swung on broken hinges. The horses rolled their eyes nervously. Eragon's palm tingled, but he resisted the urge to scratch it. As they rode into the center of town, he gripped his bow tighter, blanching. "Gods above," he whispered. A mountain of bodies rose above them, the corpses stiff and grimacing. Their clothes were soaked in blood, and the churned ground was stained with it. Slaughtered men lay over the women they had tried to protect. Mothers still clasped their children, and lovers who had tried to shield each other rested in death's cold embrace. Black arrows stuck out of them all. Neither young nor old had been spared. But worst of all was the barbed spear that rose out of the peak of the pile, impaling the white body of a baby. Tears blurred Eragon's vision, and he tried to look away, but the dead faces held his attention. He stared at their open eyes and wondered how life could have left them so easily. What does our existence mean when it can end like this? A wave of hopelessness overwhelmed him. A crow dipped out of the sky like a black shadow and perched on the spear. It cocked its head and greedily scrutinized the infant's corpse. "Oh, no, you don't," snarled Eragon as he pulled back the bowstring and released it with a twang. With a puff of feathers, the crow fell over backward, the arrow protruding from its chest. Eragon fit another arrow to the string, but nausea rose from his stomach, and he threw up over Cadoc's side. Brom patted him on the back. When Eragon was done, Brom asked gently, "Do you want to wait for me outside Yazuak?" "No, I'll stay," said Eragon shakily, wiping his mouth. He avoided looking at the gruesome sight before them. Who could have done... He could not force out the words. Brom bowed his head. "Those who love the pain and suffering of others. They wear many faces and go by many disguises, but there is only one name for them: evil. There is no understanding it. All we can do is pity and honor the victims." He dismounted Snowfire and walked around, inspecting the trampled ground carefully. "The Razak passed this way," he said slowly. "But this wasn't their doing. This is Urgel work. The spear is of their make. A company of them came through here, perhaps as many as 100. It's odd. I know of only a few instances when they have gathered in such..." He knelt and examined a footprint intently. With a curse, he ran back to Snowfire and leapt onto him. "Ride!" he hissed tightly, spurring Snowfire forward. "There are still Urgels here!" Eragon jammed his heels into Cadoc. The horse jumped forward and raced after Snowfire. They dashed past the houses and were almost to the edge of Yazuak when Eragon's palm tingled again. He saw a flicker of movement to his right. Then a giant fist smashed him out of the saddle. He flew back over Cadoc and crashed into a wall, holding on to his bow only by instinct. Gasping and stunned, he staggered upright, hugging his side. An Urgle stood over him, face set in a gross leer. The monster was tall, thick, and broader than a doorway, with gray skin and yellow piggish eyes. Muscles bulged on his arms and chest, which was covered by a too small breastplate. An iron cap rested over the pair of ram's horns curling from his temples, and a round shield was bound to one arm. His powerful hand held a short, wicked sword. Behind him, Eragon saw Brom rein in Snowfire and start back, only to be stopped by the appearance of a second Urgle, this one with an axe. "Run, you fool!" Brom cried to Eragon, cleaving at his enemy. The Urgle in front of Eragon roared and swung his sword mightily. Eragon jerked back with a startled yelp as the weapon whistled past his cheek. He spun around and fled toward the center of Yazuak, heart pounding wildly. The Urgle pursued him, heavy boots thudding. Eragon sent a desperate cry for help to Saphira, then forced himself to go even faster. The Urgle rapidly gained ground despite Eragon's efforts. Large fangs separated in a soundless bellow. With the Urgle almost upon him, Eragon strung an arrow, spun to a stop, took aim, and released. The Urgle snapped up his arm and caught the quivering bolt on his shield. The monster collided with Eragon before he could shoot again, and they fell to the ground in a confused tangle. Eragon sprang to his feet and rushed back to Brom, who was trading fierce blows with his opponent from Snowfire's back. "Where are the rest of the Urgles?" wondered Eragon frantically. "Are these two the only ones in Yazuak?" There was a loud smack, and Snowfire reared, whinnying. Brom doubled over in his saddle, blood streaming down his arm. The Urgle beside him howled in triumph and raised his axe for the death blow. A deafening scream tore out of Eragon as he charged the Urgle, head first. The Urgle paused in astonishment, then faced him contemptuously, swinging his axe. Eragon ducked under the two-handed blow and clawed the Urgle's side, leaving bloody furrows. The Urgle's face twisted with rage. He slashed again, but missed as Eragon dived to the side and scrambled down an alley. Eragon concentrated on leading the Urgles away from Brom. He slipped into a narrow passageway between two houses, saw it was a dead end, and slid to a stop. He tried to back out, but the Urgles had already blocked the entrance. They advanced, cursing him in their gravelly voices. Eragon swung his head from side to side, searching for a way out, but there was none. As he faced the Urgles, images flashed in his mind. Dead villagers piled around the spear, and an innocent baby who would never grow to adulthood. At the thought of their fate, a burning, fiery power gathered from every part of his body. It was more than a desire for justice. It was his entire being rebelling against the fact of death, that he would cease to exist. The power grew stronger and stronger until he felt ready to burst from the contained force. He stood tall and straight, all fear gone. He raised his bow smoothly. The Urgles laughed and lifted their shields. Eragon sighted down the shaft, as he had done hundreds of times, and aligned the arrowhead with his target. The energy inside him burned at an unbearable level. He had to release it, or it would consume him. A word suddenly leapt unbidden to his lips. He shot, yelling, "Brissinger!" The arrow hissed through the air, glowing with a crackling blue light. It struck the lead Urgle on the forehead, and the air resounded with an explosion. A blue shock wave blasted out of the monster's head, killing the other Urgle instantly. It reached Eragon before he had time to react, and it passed through him without harm, dissipating against the houses. Eragon stood panting, then looked at his icy palm. The Gedwe Ignacia was glowing like white-hot metal. Yet, even as he watched, it faded back to normal. He clenched his fist. Then a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He felt strange and feeble, as if he had not eaten for days. His knees buckled, and he sagged against a wall. Chapter 19. Admonishments. Once a modicum of strength returned to him, Eragon staggered out of the alley, skirting the dead monsters. He did not get far before Kadok trotted to his side. "Good. You weren't hurt," mumbled Eragon. He noticed, without particularly caring, that his hands were shaking violently, and his movements were jerky. He felt detached, as if everything he saw were happening to someone else. Eragon found Snowfire, nostrils flared and ears flat against his head, prancing by the corner of a house, ready to bolt. Brom was still slumped motionless in the saddle. Eragon reached out with his mind and soothed the horse. Once Snowfire relaxed, Eragon went to Brom. There was a long, blood-soaked cut on the old man's right arm. The wound bled profusely, but it was neither deep nor wide. Still, Eragon knew it had to be bound before Brom lost too much blood. He stroked Snowfire for a moment, then slid Brom out of the saddle. The weight proved too much for him, and Brom dropped heavily to the ground. Eragon was shocked by his own weakness. A scream of rage filled his head. Saphira dived out of the sky and landed fiercely in front of him, keeping her wings half raised. She hissed angrily, eyes burning. Her tail lashed, and Eragon winced as it snapped overhead. "Are you hurt?" she asked, rage boiling in her voice. "No," he assured her as he laid Brom on his back. She growled and exclaimed, "Where are the ones who did this? I will tear them apart." He wearily pointed in the direction of the alley. "It'll do no good. They're already dead." "You killed them?" Saphira sounded surprised. He nodded. "Somehow." With a few terse words, he told her what had happened while he searched his saddlebags for the rags in which Zarak had been wrapped. Saphira said gravely, "You have grown." Eragon grunted. He found a long rag and carefully rolled back Brom's sleeve. With a few deft strokes, he cleaned the cut and bandaged it tightly. "I wish we were still in Palancar Valley," he said to Saphira. "There, at least, I knew what plants were good for healing. Here, I don't have any idea what will help him." He retrieved Brom's sword from the ground, wiped it, then returned it to the sheath on Brom's belt. "We should leave," said Saphira. "There may be more Urgles lurking about." "Can you carry Brom? Your saddle will hold him in place, and you can protect him." "Yes, but I am not leaving you alone." "Fine, fly next to me, but let's get out of here." He tied the saddle onto Saphira, then put his arms around Brom and tried to lift him, but again his diminished strength failed him. "Saphira, help." She snaked her head past him and caught the back of Brom's robe between her teeth. Arching her neck, she lifted the old man off the ground, like a cat would a kitten, and deposited him onto her back. Then Eragon slipped Brom's legs through the saddle straps and tightened them. He looked up when the old man moaned and shifted. Brom blinked blearily, putting a hand to his head. He gazed down at Eragon with concern. "Did Saphira get here in time?" Eragon shook his head. "I'll explain it later. Your arm is injured. I bandaged it as best I could, but you need a safe place to rest." "Yes," said Brom, gingerly touching his arm. "Do you know where my sword—" "I see, you found it." Eragon finished tightening the straps. "Saphira is going to take you and follow me by air." "Are you sure you want me to ride her?" asked Brom. "I can ride Snowfire." "Not with that arm. This way, even if you faint, you won't fall off." Brom nodded. "I'm honored." He wrapped his good arm around Saphira's neck, and she took off in a flurry, springing high into the sky. Eragon backed away, buffeted by the eddies from her wings, and returned to the horses. He tied Snowfire behind Kadok, then left Yazuak, returning to the trail and following it southward. It led through a rocky area, veered left, and continued along the bank of the Nenor River. Ferns, mosses, and small bushes dotted the side of the path. It was refreshingly cool under the trees, but Eragon did not let the soothing air lull him into a sense of security. He stopped briefly to fill the waterskins and let the horses drink. Glancing down, he saw the Razah's boar. "At least we're going in the right direction." Saphira circled overhead, keeping a keen eye on him. It disturbed him that they had seen only 2 Urgles. The villagers had been killed and Yazuak ransacked by a large horde, yet where was it? Perhaps the ones we encountered were a rear guard or a trap left for anyone who was following the main force. His thoughts turned to how he had killed the Urgles. An idea, a revelation, slowly wormed its way through his mind. He, Eragon, a farm boy of Palancar Valley, had used magic. Magic! It was the only word for what had happened. It seemed impossible, but he could not deny what he had seen. Somehow I've become a sorcerer or a wizard. But he did not know how to use this new power again, or what its limits and dangers might be. How can I have this ability? Was it common among the riders? And if Brom knew of it, why didn't he tell me? He shook his head in wonder and bewilderment. He conversed with Saphira to check on Brom's condition and to share his thoughts. She was just as puzzled as he was about the magic. "Saphira, can you find us a place to stay? I can't see very far down here." While she searched, he continued along the Nenor. The summons reached him just as the light was fading. "Come." Saphira sent him an image of a secluded clearing in the trees by the river. Eragon turned the horses in the new direction and nudged them into a trot. With Saphira's help, it was easy to find, but it was so well hidden that he doubted anyone else would notice it. A small smokeless fire was already burning when he entered the clearing. Brom sat next to it, tending his arm, which he held at an awkward angle. Saphira was crouched beside him, her body tense. She looked intently at Eragon and asked, "Are you sure you weren't hurt?" "Not on the outside, but I'm not sure about the rest of me." "I should have been there sooner." "Don't feel bad. We all made mistakes today. Mine was not staying closer to you." Her gratitude for that remark washed over him. He looked at Brom. "How are you?" The old man glanced at his arm. "It's a large scratch and hurts terribly, but it should heal quickly enough. I need a fresh bandage. This one didn't last as long as I'd hoped." They boiled water to wash Brom's wound. Then Brom tied a fresh rag to his arm and said, "I must eat, and you look hungry as well. Let's have dinner first, then talk." When their bellies were full and warm, Brom lit his pipe. "Now, I think it's time for you to tell me what transpired while I was unconscious. I am most curious." His face reflected the flickering firelight, and his bushy eyebrows stuck out fiercely. Eragon nervously clasped his hands and told the story without embellishment. Brom remained silent throughout it, his face inscrutable. When Eragon finished, Brom looked down at the ground. For a long time, the only sound was the snapping fire. Brom finally stirred. "Have you used this power before?" "No. Do you know anything about it?" "A little." Brom's face was thoughtful. "It seems I owe you a debt for saving my life. I hope I can return the favor someday. You should be proud. Few escape unscathed from slaying their first Urgle, but the manner in which you did it was very dangerous. You could have destroyed yourself and the whole town." "It wasn't as if I had a choice," said Eragon defensively. "The Urgles were almost upon me. If I had waited, they would have chopped me into pieces." Brom stamped his teeth vigorously on the pipe stem. "You didn't have any idea what you were doing." "Then tell me," challenged Eragon. "I have been searching for answers to this mystery, but I can't make sense of it. What happened? How could I have possibly used magic? No one has ever instructed me in it or taught me spells." Brom's eyes flashed. "This isn't something you should be taught, much less use." "Well, I have used it, and I may need it to fight again, but I won't be able to if you don't help me. What's wrong? Is there some secret I'm not supposed to learn until I'm old and wise? Or maybe you don't know anything about magic."
"Boy!" roared Brom. "You demand answers with an insolence rarely seen. If you knew what you asked for, you would not be so quick to inquire. Do not try me."
He paused, then relaxed into a kinder countenance.
"The knowledge you ask for is more complex than you understand."
Eragon rose hotly in protest. "I feel as though I've been thrust into a world with strange rules that no one will explain."
"I understand," said Brom.
He fiddled with a piece of grass.
"It's late, and we should sleep, but I will tell you a few things now, to stop your badgering." This magic, for it is magic, has rules like the rest of the world. If you break the rules, the penalty is death, without exception. Your deeds are limited by your strength, the words you know, and your imagination.
What do you mean by words? Asked Eragon.
More questions! Cried Brom. For a moment I had hoped you were empty of them. But you are quite right in asking. When you shot the Urgals, didn't you say something?
Yes, Brisinger. The fire flared, and a shiver ran through Eragon. Something about the word made him feel incredibly alive.
I thought so. Brisinger is from an ancient language that all living things used to speak. However, it was forgotten over time, and went unspoken for eons and Alagacia, until the elves brought it back over the sea. They taught it to the other races, who used it for making and doing powerful things. The language has a name for everything, if you can find it.
But what does that have to do with magic? Interrupted Eragon.
Everything! It is the basis for all power. The language describes the true nature of things, not the superficial aspects that everyone sees. For example, fire is called Brisingar. Not only is that a name for the fire, it is the name for a fire. If you are strong enough, you can use Brisingar to direct fire to do whatever you will. And that is what happened today.
Eragon thought about it for a moment. Why was the fire blue? How come it did exactly what I wanted if all I said was fire?
The color varies from person to person. It depends on who says the word. As to why the fire did what you wanted, it's a matter of practice. Most beginners have to spell out exactly what they want to happen. As they gain more experience, it isn't as necessary. A true master could just say water and create something totally unrelated, like a gemstone. You wouldn't be able to understand how he had done it, but the master would have seen the connection between water and the gem, and would have used that as the focal point for his power. The practice is more of an art than anything else. What you did was extremely difficult.
Saphira interrupted Eragon's thoughts. Brom is a magician. That's how he was able to light the fire on the plains. He doesn't just know about magic, he can use it himself. Eragon's eyes widened. You're right. Ask him about this power, but be careful of what you say. It is unwise to trifle with those who have such abilities. If he is a wizard or a sorcerer, who knows what his motives might have been for settling in Carvajal? Eragon kept that in mind, as he said carefully, Saphira and I just realized something. You can use this magic, can't you? That's how you started the fire our first day on the plains. Brom inclined his head slightly.
I am proficient to some degree.
Then why didn't you fight the Urgals with it? In fact, I can think of many times when it would have been useful. You could have shielded us from the storm and kept the dirt out of our eyes. After refilling his pipe, Brom said,
Some simple reasons, really. I am not a rider, which means that, even at your weakest moment, you are stronger than I. And I have outlived my youth. I am not as strong as I used to be. Every time I reach for magic, it gets a little harder.
Eragon dropped his eyes, abashed. I'm sorry.
Don't be.
said Brom as he shifted his arm.
It happens to everyone.
Where did you learn to use magic?
That is one fact I'll keep to myself. Suffice it to say, it was in a remote area, and from a very good teacher. I can, at the very least, pass on his lessons.
Brom snuffed his pipe with a small rock.
I know that you have more questions, and I will answer them, but they must wait until morning.
He leaned forward, eyes gleaming.
Until then, I will say this to discourage any experiments. Magic takes just as much energy as if you had used your arms and back. That is why you felt tired after destroying the Urgles. And that is why I was angry. It was a dreadful risk on your part. If the magic had used more energy than was in your body, it would have killed you. You should use magic only for tasks that can't be accomplished the mundane way.
How do you know if a spell will use all your energy? Asked Eragon, frightened.
Brom raised his hands. Most of the time you don't. That's why magicians have to know their limits well, and even then they are cautious. Once you commit to a task and release the magic, you can't pull it back, even if it's going to kill you. I mean this as a warning. Don't try anything until you've learned more. Now, enough of this for tonight.
As they spread out their blankets, Saphira commented with satisfaction, "We are becoming more powerful, Eragon. Both of us. Soon, no one will be able to stand in our way." "Yes, but which way shall we choose?" "Whichever one we want," she said smugly, settling down for the night. Chapter 20. Magic is the simplest thing. "Why do you think those 2 Urgles were still in Yazuak?" asked Eragon, after they had been on the trail for a while. "There doesn't seem to be any reason for them to have stayed behind."
I suspect they deserted the main group to loot the town. What makes it odd is that, as far as I know, Urgles have gathered in force only 2 or 3 times in history. It's unsettling that they are doing it now.
"Do you think that the Razak caused the attack?"
I don't know. The best thing we can do is to continue away from Yazuak at the fastest pace we can muster. Besides, this is the direction the Razak went. South.
Eragon agreed. We still need provisions, however. Is there another town nearby?"
Brom shook his head. No, but Saphira can hunt for us if we must survive on meat alone. This swath of trees may look small to you, but there are plenty of animals in it. The river is the only source of water for many miles around, so most of the plains animals come here to drink. We won't starve.
Eragon remained quiet, satisfied with Brom's answer. As they rode, loud birds darted around them, and the river rushed by peacefully. It was a noisy place, full of life and energy. Eragon asked, "How did that Urgle get you? Things were happening so fast, I didn't see."
Bad luck, really, grumbled Brom. I was much more than a match for him, so he kicked Snowfire. The idiot of a horse reared and threw me off balance. That was all the Urgle needed to give me this gash. He scratched his chin. I suppose you're still wondering about this magic. The fact that you've discovered it presents a thorny problem. Few know it, but every rider could use magic, though with differing strengths. They kept the ability secret, even at the height of their power, because it gave them an advantage over their enemies. Had everyone known about it, dealing with common people would have been difficult. Many think the king's magical powers come from the fact that he is a wizard or sorcerer. That's not true. It is because he's a writer.
What's the difference? Doesn't the fact that I use magic make me a sorcerer?
Not at all. A sorcerer, like a shade, uses spirits to accomplish his will. That is totally different from your power. Nor does that make you a magician, whose powers come without the aid of spirits or a dragon. And you're certainly not a witch or wizard, who get their powers from various potions and spells. Which brings me back to my original point, the problem you've presented. Young riders like yourself were put through a strict regimen designed to strengthen their bodies and increase their mental control. This regimen continued for many months, occasionally years, until the riders were deemed responsible enough to handle magic. Up until then, not one student was told of his potential powers. If one of them discovered magic by accident, he or she was immediately taken away for private tutoring. It was rare for anyone to discover magic on his own. He inclined his head toward Eragon, though they were never put under the same pressure you were.
Then how were they finally trained to use magic? Asked Eragon. I don't see how you could teach it to anyone. If you had tried to explain it to me 2 days ago, it wouldn't have made any sense.
The students were presented with a series of pointless exercises designed to frustrate them. For example, they were instructed to move piles of stones using only their feet, fill ever-draining tubs full of water, and other impossibilities. After a time, they would get infuriated enough to use magic. Most of the time, it succeeded. What this means, Brom continued, is that you will be disadvantaged if you ever meet an enemy who has received this training. There are still some alive who are that old. The king for one, not to mention the elves. Any one of those could tear you apart with ease.
Well, what can I do then?
There isn't time for formal instruction, but we can do much while we travel, said Brom. I know many techniques you can practice that will give you strength and control, but you cannot gain the discipline the riders had overnight. You, he looked at Eragon humorously, will have to amass it on the run. It will be hard in the beginning, but the rewards will be great. It may please you to know that no rider your age ever used magic the way you did yesterday with those 2 Urgles.
Eragon smiled at the praise. Thank you. Does this language have a name?
Brom laughed. Yes, but no one knows it. It would be a word of incredible power, something by which you could control the entire language and those who use it. People have a long search for it, but no one has ever found it.
I still don't understand how this magic works, said Eragon. Exactly how do I use it?
Brom looked astonished. I haven't made that clear?
No.
Brom took a deep breath and said, To work with magic, you must have a certain innate power, which is very rare among people nowadays. You also have to be able to summon this power at will. Once it is called upon, you have to use it or let it fade away. Understood? Now, if you wish to employ the power, you must utter the word or phrase of the ancient language that describes your intent. For example, if you hadn't said Brasinger yesterday, nothing would have happened. So I'm limited by my knowledge of this language. Exactly, cried Brom. Also, while speaking it, it's impossible to practice deceit. Eragon shook his head. That can't be. People always lie. The sounds of the ancient words can't stop them from doing that. Brom cocked an eyebrow and said, Thethre blaka, eka wonota niet hana ono, blaka et lit lam. A bird suddenly flitted from a branch and landed on his hand. It trilled lightly and looked at them with beady eyes. After a moment, he said, Etha, and it fluttered away. How did you do that? Asked Eragon in wonder. I promised not to harm him. He may not have known exactly what I meant, but in the language of power, the meaning of my words was evident. The bird trusted me because he knows what all animals do, that those who speak in that tongue are bound by their word. And the elves speak this language? Yes. So they never lie? Not quite, admitted Brom. They maintain that they don't, and in a way it's true. But they have perfected the art of saying one thing and meaning another. You never know exactly what their intent is, or if you have fathomed it correctly. Many times they only reveal part of the truth, and withhold the rest. It takes a refined and subtle mind to deal with their culture. Eragon considered that. What do personal names mean in this language? Do they give power over people? Brom's eyes brightened with approval. Yes, they do. Those who speak the language have two names. The first is for everyday use and has little authority. But the second is their true name and is shared only with a few trusted people. There was a time when no one concealed his true name, but this age isn't as kind. Whoever knows your true name gains enormous power over you. It's like putting your life into another person's hands. Everyone has a hidden name, but few know what it is. How do you find your true name? Asked Eragon. Elves instinctively know theirs. No one else has that gift. The human riders usually went on quests to discover it, or found an elf who would tell them, which was rare, for elves don't distribute that knowledge freely, replied Brom. I'd like to know mine, Eragon said wistfully. Brom's brow darkened. Be careful. It can be a terrible knowledge. To know who you are without any delusions or sympathy is a moment of revelation that no one experiences unscathed. Some have been driven to madness by that stark reality. Most try to forget it. But as much as the name will give others power, so you may gain power over yourself, if the truth doesn't break you. And I'm sure that it would not, stated Saphira. I still wish to know, said Eragon, determined. You are not easily dissuaded. That is good, for only the resolute find their identity. But I cannot help you with this. It is a search that you will have to undertake on your own.
Brom moved his injured arm and grimaced uncomfortably. Why can't you or I heal that with magic? Asked Eragon. Brom blinked.
No reason. I just never considered it because it's beyond my strength. You could probably do it with the right word, but I don't want you to exhaust yourself.
I could save you a lot of trouble and pain, protested Eragon.
I'll live with it, said Brom flatly. Using magic to heal a wound takes just as much energy as it would to mend on its own. I don't want you tired for the next few days. You shouldn't attempt such a difficult task yet.
Still, if it's possible to fix your arm, could I bring someone back from the dead? The question surprised Brom, but he answered quickly.
Remember what I said about projects that will kill you? That is one of them. Riders were forbidden to try to resurrect the dead for their own safety. There is an abyss beyond life where magic means nothing. If you reach into it, your strength will flee and your soul will fade into darkness. Wizards, sorcerers, and riders all have failed and died on that threshold. Stick with what's possible. Cuts, bruises, maybe some broken bones, but definitely not dead people.
Eragon frowned. This is a lot more complex than I thought.
Exactly, said Brom. And if you don't understand what you're doing, you'll try something too big and die.
He twisted in his saddle and swooped down, grabbing a handful of pebbles from the ground. With effort, he righted himself, then discarded all but one of the rocks.
See this pebble?
Yes.
Take it.
Eragon did, and stared at the unremarkable lump. It was dull black, smooth, and as large as the end of his thumb. There were countless stones like it on the trail.
This is your training.
Eragon looked back at him, confused. I don't understand.
Of course you don't, said Brom impatiently. That's why I'm teaching you, and not the other way around. Now stop talking, or we'll never get anywhere. What I want you to do is lift the rock off your palm and hold it in the air for as long as you can. The words you're going to use are Stenjer Risa. Say them. Stenjer Risa. Good. Go ahead and try.
Eragon focused sourly on the pebble, searching his mind for any hint of the energy that had burned in him the day before. The stone remained motionless as he stared at it, sweating and frustrated. How am I supposed to do this? Finally, he crossed his arms and snapped, This is impossible.
No, said Brom gruffly. I'll say when it's impossible or not. Fight for it. Don't give in this easily. Try again.
Frowning, Eragon closed his eyes, setting aside all distracting thoughts. He took a deep breath and reached into the farthest corners of his consciousness, trying to find where his power resided. Searching, he found only thoughts and memories, until he felt something different. A small bump that was a part of him, and yet not of him. Excited, he dug into it, seeking what it hid. He felt resistance, a barrier in his mind, but knew that the power lay on the other side. He tried to breach it, but it held firm before his efforts. Growing angry, Eragon drove into the barrier, ramming against it with all his might, until it shattered like a thin pane of glass, flooding his mind with a river of light. "Senor Risa!" he gasped. The pebble wobbled into the air over his faintly glowing palm. He struggled to keep it floating, but the power slipped away and faded back beyond the barrier. The pebble dropped into his hand with a soft plop, and his palm returned to normal. He felt a little tired, but grinned from his success.
"Not bad for your first time,"
said Brom. "Why does my hand do that? It's like a little lantern."
"No one's sure," Brom admitted. "The riders always preferred to channel their power through whichever hand bore the Gedwe Ignacia. You can use your other palm, but it isn't as easy." He looked at Eragon for a minute. "I'll buy you some gloves at the next town, if it isn't gutted. You hide the mark pretty well on your own, but we don't want anyone to see it by accident. Besides, there may be times when you won't want the glow to alert an enemy."
"Do you have a mark of your own?"
"No, only riders have them," said Brom. "Also, you should know that magic is affected by distance, just like an arrow or a spear. If you try to lift or move something a mile away, it'll take more energy than if you were closer. So if you see enemies racing after you from a league away, let them approach before using magic. Now, back to work. Try to lift the pebble again."
"Again?" asked Eragon weakly, thinking of the effort it had taken to do it just once.
"Yes, and this time be quicker about it."
They continued with the exercises throughout most of the day. When Eragon finally stopped, he was tired and ill-tempered. In those hours he had come to hate the pebble and everything about it. He started to throw it away, but Brom said, "Don't. Keep it." Eragon glared at him, then reluctantly tucked the stone into a pocket.
"We're not done yet," warned Brom, "so don't get comfortable."
He pointed at a small plant.
"This is called Delios."
From there on, he instructed Eragon in the ancient language, giving him words to memorize, from Wunder, a thin straight stick, to the morning star, Edial. That evening they sparred around the fire. Though Brom fought with his left hand, his skill was undiminished. The days followed the same pattern. First, Eragon struggled to learn the ancient words and tried to manipulate the pebble. Then, in the evening, he trained against Brom with the fake swords. Eragon was in constant discomfort, but he gradually began to change, almost without noticing. Soon the pebble no longer wobbled when he lifted it. He mastered the first exercises Brom gave him and undertook harder ones, and his knowledge of the ancient language grew. In their sparring, Eragon gained confidence and speed, striking like a snake. His blows became heavier, and his arm no longer trembled when he warded off attacks. The clashes lasted longer as he learned how to fend off Brom. Now, when they went to sleep, Eragon was not the only one with bruises. Saphira continued to grow as well, but more slowly than before. Her extended flights, along with periodic hunts, kept her fit and healthy. She was taller than the horses now, and much longer. Because of her size and the way her scales sparkled, she was altogether too visible. Brom and Eragon worried about it, but they could not convince her to allow dirt to obscure her scintillating hide. They continued south, tracking the Razak. It frustrated Eragon that no matter how fast they went, The Razak always stayed a few days ahead of them. At times he was ready to give up, but then they would find some mark or print that would renew his hope. There were no signs of habitation along the Nanor or in the plains, leaving the three companions undisturbed as the days slipped by. Finally, they neared Daret, the first village since Yazuak. The night before they reached the village, Eragon's dreams were especially vivid. He saw Garrow and Roran at home, sitting in the destroyed kitchen. They asked him for help rebuilding the farm, but he only shook his head with a pang of longing in his heart. "I'm tracking your killers," he whispered to his uncle. Garrow looked at him askance and demanded, "Do I look dead to you?" "I can't help you," said Eragon softly, feeling tears in his eyes. There was a sudden roar, and Garrow transformed into the Razak. "Then die!" they hissed and leapt at Eragon. He woke up feeling ill and watched the stars slowly turn in the sky. "All will be well, little one," said Saphira gently.